In February of 1958, the Ford Motor Company unveiled an extraordinary concept for the automobile of the future. Dubbed the Nucleon, the vehicle was a showcase of mid-century styling and technology, featuring sleek, futuristic lines, optional tail fins, one-piece wraparound front and rear windscreens, electric torque converters, proximity sensors, and automatic climate control for the cabin. Oh, and for those who care about such things, it was powered by a miniature nuclear reactor. As Ford's ad copy breathlessly proclaimed, a glimpse into an atomic-powered future when car drivers might select their own horsepower is preceded by the Nucleon, developed by advanced stylists in the Ford Motor Company's styling office to probe possible styling influences of atomic power in automobiles. The model features a power capsule suspended between twin booms at the rear, which would contain a radioactive core providing motive power. Power output of the car could be controlled at the driver's option, much as the intensity of the reaction in a nuclear pile is controlled. Cars like the Nucleon might be able to travel 5,000 miles or more, depending on the size of the core, without recharging. At the time, they would be taken to a recharging station, which advanced stylists envision as largely replacing the present-day service station. Here now is the story of the brief and bonkers rise and fall of the atomic car. Just before we get back into today's video, speaking of rising things, your finances with today's sponsor, Rocket Money, the money app that works for you. Rocket Money is a personal finance app designed to help you manage your money better and save more. Doing things like tracking your spending and investments across accounts, creates custom budgets, and automates savings all in one place. It even helps cancel subscriptions and negotiate lowering certain of your bills for you. For me, this included randomly discovering I have 3 YouTube premium subscriptions somehow, and likely for years, as it's been many years since I signed up for premium. They also canceled for me a cable subscription I got for playoff baseball for 1 month, and proceeded to forget all about it in the few months since. In all, Rocket Money not only helps you manage money to save for your current goals, but also if you apply all this to long-term goals, like an investment account, can be a massive swing. For example, if you're currently around 25 years old and have a random subscription you've forgotten all about and don't use that's just $9.99 per month billed annually, a single year of that subscription put into a target retirement index fund instead of being paid to some company you don't even use anymore would not only be a little tax write-off, but likely amount to just over an $8,000 boost for you upon retirement. All from just 1 year of such a $9.99 subscription diverted to better use for that money. For reference, Rocket Money has helped customers save up to $740 per year when they use all the app's premium features, which in the previous 25-year-old and compounding interest calculation, if diverted to such a retirement account instead, would likely be about $42,000 extra upon retirement for just 1 year of that $740 savings. At the end of the day, keeping a handle on what money is coming in and what's going out is incredibly important to your current and long-term financial goals, but that takes a lot of time and effort normally. Rocket Money can help considerably with that, simplifying it all so you can also better utilize your most valuable asset of all, your time, for whatever you want to do with it. So to save more and spend less, join the over 10 million members using Rocket Money today, scan the QR code, or click the link in the description to get started for free. Now let's get back to today's video. In the decade immediately following the Second World War, the United States was gripped by a nuclear mania. Documentaries and television shows like Disney's 1957 production, Our Friend the Atom, sold the public a future in which nuclear technology would solve all of society's problems, generating electricity too cheap to meter, creating high-yield disease-resistant crops, and curing all manner of human diseases. Nuclear reactors, it was thought, would eventually be integrated into nearly every type of transportation, including cargo ships, Navy submarines, freight trains, trucks and cars, and even aircraft and spacecraft. And indeed, many of these applications were eventually realized, or at least seriously explored. For example, on January 16, 1955, the USS Nautilus became the first submarine to get underway on nuclear power. The first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Enterprise, followed in 1961, and today over 160 naval vessels worldwide are nuclear-powered. On the civilian side, in 1957, the Soviet Union launched the nuclear-powered icebreaker Lenin, with the United States following suit 2 years later with the NS Savannah, a sleek and futuristic nuclear-powered cargo freighter and passenger liner. 3 more nuclear-powered civilian ships, the West German Otto Hahn in 1968, the Japanese Mutsu in 1970, and the Soviet Sevmorput in 1988 would eventually be constructed. Looking skyward, in 1946, the United States Air Force launched nuclear energy for the propulsion of aircraft, or NEPA, with the goal of building a nuclear-powered strategic bomber that could remain on airborne alert for weeks or even months at a time. This all culminated in the construction of the NB-36H, a modified version of the Convair B-36 Peacemaker, which flew with a 2.5 megawatt aircraft reactor experiment, or R, aboard, though the reactor did not actually power the aircraft. Similar experiments were conducted by the Soviet Union around the same time using a modified Tupolev Tu-95 Bear strategic bomber. Extensive research was also conducted on nuclear power on propulsion for spacecraft. Several unmanned nuclear reactor-powered spacecraft were built and launched, including the American Systems for Nuclear Auxiliary Power, or SNAP-10A, in 1965, and the Soviet USA, or Roarsat, surveillance satellites between 1967 and 1988, while reactor-based rocket engines developed by the American Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Application, or NERVA program, were seriously considered for use in the massive Saturn V rocket that carried the Apollo astronauts to the moon. And on the truly insane end of the spectrum, Project Orion, active between 1958 and 1963, sought to build a massive spacecraft propelled by the sequential detonations of small nuclear warheads, while Project Plowshares and its Soviet equivalent, Nuclear Explosions for the National Economy, tried to find peaceful, civilian uses for nuclear explosions, such as digging harbors and canals, generating useful radioisotopes, and stimulating hard-to-extract oil and gas fields. Part of this gung-ho enthusiasm for all things nuclear was simply a consequence of public fascination with the new and mysterious power that science had unlocked. However, there was also a deliberate driving force behind the post-war atomic craze, which on its surface was for the benefit of mankind, but held a slightly darker tone behind the scenes. On January 28, 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower, formerly Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe during the Second World War, took office as the 34th President of the United States. On December 8th of that same year, Eisenhower stood before the United Nations General Assembly and announced a bold new initiative called Atoms for Peace. He stated, "It is not enough to take this weapon out of the hands of the soldiers, it must be put into the hands of those who will know how to strip its military casing and adapt it to the arts of peace." The United States knows that peaceful power from atomic energy is no dream of the future. That capability, already proved, is here now today. Who can doubt if the entire body of the world's scientists and engineers had adequate amounts of fissionable material with which to test and develop their ideas, they would devise methods whereby this fissionable material would be allocated to serve the peaceful pursuit of mankind. Experts would be mobilized to apply atomic energy to the needs of agriculture, medicine, and other peaceful activities. A special purpose would be to provide abundant electrical energy in the power-starved areas of the world. Thus, the contributing powers would be dedicating some of their strength to serve the needs rather than the fears of mankind. Against the dark background of the atomic bomb, the United States does not wish merely to present strength, but also the desire and the hope for peace. As part of the Atoms for Peace, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, or AEC, exported over 25 tons of highly enriched uranium and other nuclear technology to 30 countries. This was all on the condition that the recipients only use these materials for peaceful purposes, such as physics and medical research. The AEC also funded domestic initiatives such as the construction of the Shippingport Atomic Power Station in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, which first attained criticality on December 2, 1957, and of course, the aforementioned NS Savannah and Project Plowshares. But while Atoms for Peace was presented as a radical departure from Cold War nuclear brinkmanship aimed at curbing proliferation by promoting peaceful uses for nuclear technology, behind the scenes, the project's aims were very different. Far from rejecting nuclear weapons, Eisenhower wholly embraced them, believing a large stockpile of nuclear weapons to be a more cost-effective deterrent to Soviet aggression than conventional military force and a cure for ballooning defense budgets. This stripped-down nuclear-centered policy became known as the New Look. But there was a huge problem. By the time Eisenhower took office, the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were well known to the American people, and a push towards a massive nuclear stockpile risked frightening them. Atoms for Peace was thus conceived as a public-facing smokescreen for the new look, allowing the US military to pursue its program of nuclear armament under the cover of peaceful intentions. This policy also allowed the United States to project and maintain its global influence through the sharing of nuclear materials and technology. Prior to 1949, the United States had kept its nuclear capabilities a closely guarded military secret. However, once the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, RDS-1, on August 29, 1949, it was feared that they would share their atomic secrets with aligned nations and thereby increase their political influence. Eisenhower thus sought to head off the Soviets by sharing American nuclear technology first. The third and final aim of the Atoms for Peace was an economic one. By demonstrating the economic potential of nuclear power through the construction of power stations like Shippingport and vehicles like the NS Savannah, the ever budget-conscious Eisenhower hoped to convince the private sector to invest heavily in the technology and take on at least some of the federal government's research burden. But whether driven by simple fascination or deliberate government propaganda, the atomic craze took the American people by storm, and the private sector was quick to exploit the public's fascination by associating its products with all things nuclear. In particular, the automotive industry hopped on the bandwagon by unveiling a number of futuristic concept vehicles which, they assured consumers, would soon be powered by cheap, inexhaustible nuclear power. Indeed, by the 1950s, the concept of the so-called atomic car would have been very familiar to readers of comic books and pulp sci-fi magazines, with such vehicles appearing in their pages as early as 1928, a full decade before the discovery of uranium fission and the nuclear chain reaction. As a result, the popular imagination was already well primed for this particular herald of glorious atomic future. But by far, the most famous atomic concept car to come out of this period was the Nucleon, unveiled by the Ford Motor Company in February of 1958 as a 3/8 scale mock-up. Styling-wise, as noted, the Nucleon was well in keeping with the space-age aesthetics of the period, with sleek, streamlined curves and large optional tail fins. It also sported a number of features that would have seemed advanced on any vehicle. As Ford pamphlet proudly boasted, the passenger compartment of the Nucleon features a one-piece, pillarless windshield and compound rear window and is topped by a cantilever roof. There are air intakes at the leading end of the roof at the base of its supports. Temperature inside the passenger compartment would be regulated electronically, making possible the use of fixed windows. Slit beam horizontal headlights adjust for all road conditions, are housed in the front end of the Nucleon, together with electronic devices to warn of approaching vehicles. The approach of vehicles from the rear could be detected by means of antenna fixed in the trailing edge of the roof. Retractable front and rear bumpers provide additional aerodynamic advantages. However, the centerpiece of the Nucleon was its nuclear power plant, which was housed in an atomic capsule suspended between two booms extended from the rear of the passenger compartment. Effectively a miniaturized version of the pressurized water reactors, or PWRs, used in the US Navy submarines like the USS Nautilus, this power plant would use the heat of nuclear chain reaction to generate steam, which would then be passed through a steam turbine connected to the drivetrain. This in itself is not as exotic as you might think, as for many years steam-powered cars enjoyed a surprisingly large share of the early automotive market. Indeed, the Stanley Motor Carriage Company of Watertown, Massachusetts sold a popular line of steam-powered cars known as Stanley Steamers from 1902 to 1924, while other companies continued to produce examples until the end of the 1930s. Compared to early gasoline-powered vehicles, steam cars offered numerous advantages in terms of cost, reliability, speed, and endurance, and ease of starting. But ultimately, rapid improvements in internal combustion engine design, the invention of the electric starter motor, and the extreme cost savings offered by Henry Ford's assembly line production methods negated most of these advantages and led to the technology's downfall. But that fascinating story and that of early electric cars, which also dominated early motoring, is a subject for a future video. Getting back to our story, Ford claimed that the Nucleon would be able to drive up to 8,000 kilometers, or 5,000 miles, 1/5 the circumference of the Earth at the equator, before its atomic capsule needed to be swapped out for a fresh unit, a process it envisioned being performed at recharging stations that would eventually replace all gas stations. Ford also speculated that drivers would be able to select different reactor cores optimized for different performance criteria, such as speed or endurance. Ultimately, however, the Nucleon never made it past the mock-up stage, nor really was it ever intended to, with George W. Walker, Ford's vice president and director of styling, explaining that This model is an eloquent example of the extent to which research into the future is conducted by advanced stylists of Ford Motor Company. It indicates the stylist's unwillingness to admit that a thing cannot be done simply because it has not been done. For reasons we'll get into in a minute, the technology to make a car like the Nucleon feasible never emerged, but this did not stop other automotive companies from hopping on the atomic bandwagon. Indeed, while the Ford Nucleon is by far the best remembered atomic car, it was far from the only one, nor even the first. While the Soviet Union claimed to have developed a practical nuclear-powered car as early as 1955, this claim was widely dismissed by the Western world, with Car and Driver magazine acerbically commenting that, coming from a nation that modestly admits to having invented everything, this announcement failed to create the excitement it might have. Instead, the dubious honor of introducing the world's first allegedly nuclear-powered car belongs not to the Soviet Union, nor even to its Cold War superpower rival in the United States, but a far unlikelier player, France. In 1950, Casimir Loubiret, a French car salesman and amateur engineer, began working on what he hoped would be the ultimate car for his struggling post-war nation, futuristic and attractive, but reliable and easy to maintain. This endeavor was bankrolled by his brother, Maurice, who owned Cosra, a highly successful transport and logistics company based in Saigon, French Indochina, today the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. In 1951, Loubiret unveiled his creation at the Paris Motor Show. Dubbed the Symetric or symmetrical, the car resembled a rolling greenhouse, the body and passenger compartment composed of curved, clear, and colored plastic panels fixed to a lightweight tubular metal frame. The two-piece doors opened in a clamshell fashion, with the upper clear panel sliding upward into the roof and the lower opaque panel sliding into the chassis. Even more innovative, the Symetric featured a hybrid propulsion system with a 1.1-liter, four-cylinder engine driving a generator that supplied power to a storage battery and 4 electric motors mounted directly in the wheel hubs. This system eliminated the need for the usual clutch and brake pedals. Instead, pressing the accelerator pedals supplied electricity to the motors, while releasing it engaged a regenerative braking system that recharged the battery and, at speeds over 15 kilometers or 9 miles per hour, automatically applied a set of drum brakes. On the more dubious end of things, for the sake of simplicity and ease of maintenance, the Symetric dispensed entirely with conventional springs and shock absorbers, its suspension consisting entirely of just solid rubber blocks. Yet despite attracting some attention from the French army, who purchased a prototype for evaluation, the Symetric failed to catch on with the French public, and it and its creator quietly faded into obscurity. But then, in 1958, both suddenly came roaring back into the limelight in spectacular and bizarre fashion. In that year, Loubiret dramatically relaunched the Symetric, exhibiting it at the glamorous Pré Catalan in Paris, as well as the Paris and Geneva motor shows. In the intervening decade, Loubiret had teamed up with automotive stylist François Arbel, who revamped the original design with a generous dash of chrome trim and trendy tail fins. Other design changes, including separate brake and accelerator pedals, glow-in-the-dark bumpers, a windshield washer system that automatically topped itself up with rainwater, an ashtray that automatically emptied itself, and a fuel tank integrated directly into the chassis, which you may recognize as the feature which turned the Ford Pinto into an infamous fire trap. And the innovations didn't end there. In addition to a traditional 50 or 75 horsepower gasoline piston engine, the Arabelle Symetric Loubiret could also be fitted with a diesel-fueled turbine system or a 40 kilowatt nuclear turbine system that allegedly used a sealed capsule of nuclear waste to power the vehicle for up to 5 years without refueling. However, the car's official brochure advised potential consumers that the nuclear-powered option was dependent on government approval. Meanwhile, Loubiret announced that full-scale production of the Arabelle Symetric would soon commence at a brand new factory in Nice, and that the car would also make its debut in the Parisian taxi fleet within 6 months. Participation in the 1959 24 Hours of Le Mans endurance race was also rumored. But if all this sounds too good to be true, that's because it was. And after a few gullible early adopters fronted Loubiret 900,000 francs each to pre-order their Symetrics, in 1959 the company suddenly folded and both the prototypes and their inventor mysteriously vanished. Like so many other miracle cars throughout the century, the Arabelle Symetric was little more than an elaborate scam, exploiting the post-war public's hunger for better living through technology. Moving on from there, on January the 12th, 1958, the same year as the Arabelle Symetric's flashy debut, the American Studebaker-Packard Corporation unveiled its own atomic concept car, the Astral, at the South Bend Art Center in Indiana. Designed by Edward Herman, Studebaker-Packard's director of interior design, the full-size mock-up was probably the closest the auto industry has come to producing George Jetson's flying car in real life. Built largely of glass-reinforced plastic, the futuristic, flying saucer-shaped vehicle was designed to balance on a single wheel thanks to a set of stabilizing gyroscopes, though promotional materials imagine future versions which could float over water or even fly through the air, powered by a compact nuclear reactor. And if all that wasn't fantastical enough, to protect the occupants from collisions and nuclear radiation from the reactor, the Astral would eventually be equipped with an invisible force field generator instead of ordinary windows and body panels. But while the Astral was widely exhibited at auto shows and Studebaker dealerships in New York, Los Angeles, Geneva, and other cities, it never made it past the mock-up stage, largely due to Studebaker-Packard going under just a decade later. The mock-up was placed in storage where it remained for nearly 30 years before being rediscovered, restored, and placed in the Studebaker National Museum in South Bend, where it remains to this day. A similar concept unveiled the following year at the Geneva Auto Show was the Fulgur, designed by legendary auto stylist Robert Opron for French car manufacturer Simca. Designed to show what cars might look like in the year 2000, the Fulgur was, similar to the Astra, designed to balance on two wheels using gyroscopes. It would also feature radar guidance, voice command control, and of course, a nuclear power plant. But just like the Nucleon and Astral before it, the Fulgur was only ever intended as a design exercise and no working examples were ever built. Finally, one of the last atomic concept cars to be unveiled was Ford's Seattleite 21, which made its debut on April the 20th, 1962 as a 3/8 scale model displayed at the Century 21 Exposition in Seattle, the same World's Fair that gave the city its iconic Space Needle. Like the Nucleon before it, the Seattleite 21 was a styling experiment with its many forward-looking features, which could lead to exciting new concepts of automobile styling, comfort, and safety. Designed to run on a replaceable nuclear capsule, or, for the more nuclear-wary consumer, hydrogen fuel cells, the Seattleite featured a number of technologies that would eventually become commonplace in consumer vehicles, including an interactive computer information and satellite navigation system. There were also other, less prophetic features, including 6 wheels, 4 in the front and 2 in the back, for greater traction and control, and fingertip-controlled steering dials in place of traditional steering wheels. But most bizarre of all, the Seattleite was envisioned as a modular, multi-purpose vehicle, the 2-seat front compartment being designed to break away from the rear passenger or cargo compartment to become a fast, compact city runabout similar to a modern smart car. Such modularity has fascinated auto designers ever since, though no production examples have yet hit the market. But just like the Nucleon, Fulgur, Astral, and Symetric before it, the Seattleite 21 never left the mock-up stage, and the bright-eyed dream of an atomic car soon faded for one simple reason: the technology never caught up with the vision. As Ford styling director George W. Walker explained in a pamphlet on the 1958 Nucleon, this vehicle was styled on the assumption that the present bulkiness and weight of nuclear reactors and attendant shielding will someday be reduced. It seems reasonable to suppose that engineers eventually will discover a way to make this weight reduction possible. But this anticipated weight reduction never materialized, for while nuclear reactors do indeed offer extraordinary energy density, with 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds of uranium being equivalent to a whopping 3.9 million kilograms or 8.6 million pounds of gasoline, they are difficult to scale down to a form factor that can easily be integrated into motor vehicles. One major issue is the fundamental requirement for a minimum critical mass of fissile material to sustain the nuclear chain reaction. This mass can be significantly reduced by enriching the fuel, that is, increasing the proportions of the fissile uranium-235 isotope, but this brings with it additional problems. Not only is uranium enrichment an eye-wateringly resource-intensive and expensive process, but highly enriched uranium, or HEU, can also be used to manufacture nuclear weapons, making its production highly regulated. However, if for the sake of argument we're unconcerned with the possibility of the fuel falling into the hands of terrorists or eccentric inventors with modified DeLoreans, an automobile-sized nuclear reactor is technically feasible, kind of. For example, one of the smallest nuclear reactors ever developed was the Soviet BES-5 that powered the USA or Roarsat series of ocean observation satellites. Fueled by a homogeneous mixture of highly enriched uranium and beryllium oxide, the BES-5 weighed 53 kilograms or 117 pounds and had a maximal thermal power output of 100 kilowatts or 133 horsepower and a maximum electrical output of 5 kilowatts or 6.7 horsepower. Electrical conversion, however, was accomplished using solid-state thermoelectric generators, which have an efficiency of only 5 to 8%. If, instead, we use a more efficient Stirling engine, which can reach efficiencies as high as 30 to 50%, we could theoretically achieve a power output of 30 to 50 kilowatts, or 40 to 67 horsepower, and a power-to-weight ratio of 0.56 to 0.94 kilowatts per kilogram, or 0.34 to 0.57 horsepower per pound. By comparison, the standard non-turbocharged engine from a smart car weighs 170 kilograms, or 374 pounds, and puts out a maximum of 52 kilowatts, or 70 horsepower, for a power-to-weight ratio of 0.3 kilowatts per kilogram, or 0.18 horsepower per pound, which is around the same. So a nuclear-powered car is technically feasible, or at least it would be, were it not for the slight problem of the massive amounts of neutron radiation spewing out of the reactor at all times. Indeed, the main reason the BES-5 was able to be made so light and compact was that it was designed to power an unmanned satellite in outer space, and even then, more than 300 kilograms, or 660 pounds, of shielding was still needed to protect the satellite's onboard electronics from the reactor's massive neutron flux. As of this recording, no miraculous advancement in metallurgy of the kind George W. Walker prophesized have been made, meaning the only way of blocking radiation from a nuclear reactor is using thick, dense shielding like steel, concrete, lead, or depleted uranium. In fact, it has been estimated that to render a nuclear-powered car safe to drive would require some 50 tons of shielding, effectively keeping said vehicle firmly stuck on the curbside. Similar problems plagued pretty much every other attempt to integrate nuclear reactors into conventional vehicles. For example, the Nuclear Energy for the Propulsion of Aircraft, or NEPA project, discovered that some 11 tons of lead and rubber shielding were needed to protect the NB-36H testbed aircraft's crew from the onboard reactor's radiation output. This, in turn, prevented the aircraft from carrying any sort of bomb load, rendering it useless as a strategic weapon. The Soviet nuclear aircraft program ran into similar problems, but attempted to get around them in the most communist way possible by eliminating the shielding altogether and mandating that only the oldest crews in the Soviet Air Force, who had presumably already had children and done their reproductive duty for the motherland, fly the aircraft. Thankfully, however, the project was canceled before this testicle frying policy could be implemented. Even the most technically sound implementations of civilian nuclear propulsion, such as the nuclear cargo ships NS Savannah and Otto Hahn, proved commercially unviable due to their extremely high cost of construction, operation, and maintenance. The Savannah was retired after only 10 years in service, having sailed the world flying the flag for President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace initiative, but never turning a profit, while all other civilian nuclear ships, except the Russian Sevmorput cargo ship, Antarctica, Timer, Project 22220, and Project 10510 class icebreakers were ultimately converted to conventional power. Another nail in the coffin for the atomic car was the public's rapidly souring attitude towards nuclear technology. As the Cold War dragged on, the public grew increasingly alarmed by incidents like the 1954 Castle Bravo accident, the 1957 Windscale fire, the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, and the 1979 Three Mile Island meltdown. As a result, outside of Doc Brown, the average motorist became less than enthused by the prospect of driving around with a nuclear reactor in the trunk and of every minor fender bender potentially turning into a mini Chernobyl. The auto industry, sensing which way the radioactive wind was blowing, thus abandoned its shiny atomic visions and pursued other approaches to market its products. And so it was that nearly as quickly as it had appeared, the dream of the atomic car faded from zeitgeist, taking its place alongside the flying car and personal jetpack in the annals of futuristic transportation technologies that will likely never grace our garages, because it turns out, even if we can make those things, they are all inherently extremely dangerous for day-to-day use. And speaking of dangerous things, not subscribing to this channel. Subscribers of this channel will be guaranteed preferential treatment when our lizard overlords descend upon humanity and take their rightful place over us, allowing us all to toil away in their sugar caves for our own benefit, no longer needing to stress about the cares and worries of the before times and the above ground world. And listen, while this may all sound scary at first glance, this is simply because change is scary. To help make it less so, do click subscribe. By doing so, Simon will make sure you aren't only beaten when you stop working, but also for the amusement of our glorious rulers anytime. Now, You might think you wouldn't want this, but as our basement-dwelling authors and producers have learned over the years, there is great truth in Alexander Dumas' immortal words at the end of the greatest novel ever written, The Count of Monte Cristo, where the character of Edmond Dantes learns the joy imprisonment and beatings can bring, noting, "There is neither happiness nor misery in the world, there is only the comparison of one state with another, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief is best able to experience supreme happiness. We must have felt what it is to die, that we may appreciate the enjoyments of life." Ergo, more beatings and suffering equals more ability to experience true happiness. Those beaten less may even grow discontented with the work in the mines. Those beaten the most and randomly at the whims of our great lizard rulers come to realize the incredible joy in all aspects of life and every moment that doesn't include being beaten, thereby much happier in their work. So subscribe now while you still can, and be prepared for the joy that will inevitably come after being a member of this community. Thank you for watching, and I hope the beatings help you have a phenomenal day.